institutions and where medical needs are within the country. He's a very smart man. During COVID, what happened in Papua New Guinea, you could only meet, being a communal society, they couldn't ban people from seeing people. It just would not have worked. And so they put a limit on it, 10 people. And so on Sabbaths, he said, all right, I'll just meet with my family and we'll invite our neighbours and some of our friends. And they had 10 people. And soon they had 20 people. And soon they had 30, 50, 80 people. And thankfully the government changed their laws and did allow for more people to come. And he started in March 2020, and he said, Pastor, I'm not a preacher. All I have is a World Changers Bible, and we've got some and we've given to everybody. And from the World Changers Bible, we use the Bible Discovery reading material. And he said, we sit and read the Bible. With some of the kids, we act it out and have fun with it. And then we ask the basic questions. And we did that all during COVID. And at the end of COVID, we had baptised 11 people and have 80 people coming to our group. On one Wednesday afternoon, I went around Goroka. Now, Goroka is not a really big city. And we went from one part of Goroka to another part. And the story was this. This is called the Orange Small Group. The reason is they started on Sabbath during COVID under these orange trees. Well, in fact, the first Sabbath, the businessman here and his wife, that's their house. They started in there, but it grew within a couple of Sabbaths. They had to meet under the orange trees. So they call themselves the Orange Small Group. The Orange Small Group from March 2020 to now has 160 people in it. They have built a church on the businessman's property that seats between 180 and 200, and they are calling themselves the Orange Seventh-day Adventist Church because it started under the orange trees. Then I went to another small group, and how's this? This is just a small group, and you can see they're welcoming me. And this is at Gonix. I went to 4 in an afternoon. The stories were all the same. In March 2020, with lockdown, they started with between 4 and 10 people, and every one of the groups have grown. The smallest was Kelvin Waikavi's, 80. The largest was the biggest, was Orange. The orange group, but between 80 and 160 people in these groups in that time. A lot of former members coming back. And all of them say, we're not going back to our other churches. This is our church now. This is what's important to me. And then wherever you go, you see people with, some of them have the lesson pamphlet, and you'll see a number of them have the World Changers Bibles. We have printed 750,000 World Changer Bibles and distributed them through the division. We don't even have that many members, because we know that it's only through the Word of God getting in people's hands that revival and all of this kind of thing happens. So back in around Goroka, that mission, the Eastern Highlands Chimbu mission, during COVID, started 226 new churches, all the same way. And Papua New Guinea, in the first year of COVID, baptised 49,000 people. That would be 4 conferences. for Australia in 1 year. The South Pacific Division was the only division to grow in the first year of the pandemic, and it was all because of what has happened in the Papua New Guinea and the Trans-Pacific with the World Changer Bibles and Discovery Bible reading groups. The church planting happens with a whole lot of different ways. I'm now in the Solomon Islands, and around Honiara I can take you to dozens of groups started the same way, mainly by lay people with their Bibles and their Bible discovery. This is in an area very, very close to Bloody Ridge, which was the famous place where the Americans and Japanese battle happened. And I asked them, when you do your gardens, what do you find? And they find what you think they will find. Even bombs, grenades, bullets, all kinds of things. And a retired pastor is helping them out, Pastor Sam Panda, and that's where they meet under. And that's typical of what happens in the Pacific. But this is what they're building probably about 200 metres away. And see the ridge up there? The next ridge is Bloody Ridge, which, very famous, the Battle of Guadalcanal. I'm now in a place called Seaford in Western Australia, where a group of people worship every Sabbath. They do not have one location. They meet in people's homes. They meet in people's in parks. They have a very strong network where they all meet during the week to pray for new people, to have a list of people that they've written down who they're praying for and who they're interacting with, and they're sharing their faith. And then they have worship together and socials together, and their friends come. People have come from Faith FM as contacts. People have come from the Prescott Southern School, and people have come from the interaction of the social things, and they've had baptisms through the relationship network. And that's in Seaford, a completely new area on the south coast of Adelaide. This is in New Caledonia. There's a group of people in New Caledonia called the Kaladoshi. The Kaladoshi are the French, the descendants of the French who have intermarried with the local Kanaks, but basically they keep French culture, and they are as secular and as almost atheistic as many French are, as you will find people in France. So the Kaladoshi have been the hardest people to reach for the New Caledonian mission. And Dr. Hatzar is the pastor. He's a missiologist, a very smart man who has trained his people in the basic things that I've been talking about, but as a missiologist, he can go a whole lot deeper in sharing faith. And there was some people who retired to a town about 100 k's out of Noumea, the capital, and it was a Kaladoshi village. They had a Catholic church, no priest, no mass. People didn't care. The Adventist people retired, go out there, live there, get involved in the community, go fishing with the people, go gardening with all of the people. And they started inviting people over to their place, and people started inviting the Adventists to their place. So there was a really good relationship. They were able to start sharing spiritual things. And out of that, people had some really interesting questions. And so they said, well, hey, we're happy to answer your questions. And once a month, we'll even invite our pastor to come and help. And the people thought that was great. And they started meeting, and they had up to 12 people of the Kaladoshi group coming. Then COVID struck, and in New Caledonia, they banned everything. And during COVID, one of the people of the village had a death in the family through a car accident. And because they had no priest, they said to the Adventist people, we're able to have a funeral, but we've got no priest. Can you get your priest to come and do the funeral? And that was Dr. Hatza. And so he took an Adventist funeral service in the Catholic Church for all of the village during COVID. But after COVID, when the restrictions lifted, the Adventist people said, well, to all of the others who were coming to their Bible group during the week, can you come back? Nobody came. They'd kind of forgotten and out of routine and all of that. So they went back to the church in Noumea and said, look, can you please pray for us? And they prayed. And eventually some people started coming back. And now this is the group that they have on their weekly Bible study group. And earlier this year, they actually formed a new company in a completely, this is not just in a completely new area, it's a completely new people group that they have planted this church in. And there you see some of these people, and as you can see, some of them are mixed and some of them are French, but they all claim to be descendants of the original colonisers, the French there. And just an exciting story of what God is doing. I've told you stories from every one of our unions. Church planting is alive. It requires pastors, administrators, and entities to be open to the work of the people who are bold and courageous and willing to do it, who listen to the Spirit and say, this is what I want to do. I am really a believer in church planting. My kids were involved in church planting with me, and my daughter, who is a graduate from here in teaching, but actually works as a chaplain at an Adventist school, last Sabbath started a house church with new people, have the support of a local church, and they're saying, the people we're reaching won't come to your church. The church is only 2 kilometres away. And people will say, oh, you don't need another Adventist church. Yes, you do. Because that Adventist church is not reaching the people that are the friends of my daughter and her network. And so we've got to start thinking about how we can accept and be involved with all of these different types of churches. Because when you read the New Testament, and this is what hopefully Acts told you, and if you do that study in Corinth, when it says to the church in Corinth, to the church in Philippi, don't think one church and one building, because there wasn't a building, it was people's households. Oikos, Greek word. And there were numerous ones. And they all related to different people groups. Just like the General Conference, amazing. 10 churches in about a 5-kilometre range, but all reaching different people. That's what we need to keep doing, and particularly in our neighbours. And I was telling you that we've worked a partnership with the Southern Asia Pacific Division, and we are now going to pay from this division international service employees to go and work there. And that's in Laos, Cambodia, Timor-Leste. They don't want us to go to the Philippines. Hundreds of Adventists, well, actually 1 million. I think there's about a million Adventists in the Philippines. They want us to go to the hard places and help them. Let me give you an illustration. There is one island above Australia that is divided in two. One side is Papua New Guinea, the other side is West Papua. They both have about 8 million people. The Papua New Guinea side has over 500,000 Seventh-day Adventists. The West Papua side has about 30,000 Seventh-day Adventists. The Papua New Guineans are trying to make every village along the border between the two countries a Seventh-day Adventist village, or have a Seventh-day Adventist presence. They're doing pretty well at that. Because what you don't hear, and I've flown down that border and I've seen it, you don't hear about the refugee camps of all the people coming out of West Papua into Papua New Guinea, because it's not an issue that the big governments want to deal with. But we are seeing dozens of people coming over on a regular basis every day, coming into refugee camps and meeting Adventists and becoming Adventists, and we are encouraging them, and I've met some of them, to go back as missionaries. But what we have said to the East Indonesian Union, we will send Papua New Guineans, because it's the same culture. Now, when I say that, Papua New Guinea has 800 languages, and every language is a different culture. And I know that. It's really diverse. It's the same on the West Papua side. But really, they should be the one country. And the Papua New Guineans are excited about thinking that they can send missionaries over to the other side. We will pay for it, because that is our role, to help world mission. And the focus will be not to pastor existing churches, but to start new churches. Do you know that every Seventh-day Adventist church in Papua New Guinea has what they call a hand church, and some of them have 9. That means that they are working in up to 9 different people groups or areas to start new churches from one church. My dream is that we see every church in our division think about the people that they're reaching, and then thinking, what relationship stream, what other people group, what suburb could we do something different to reach other people? You want to be in it? Is that why you're here? Is God doing something in your heart and mind and passion, and saying, hey, this is where it is? I believe he is. I'm glad you're here at Avondale. And I look forward to seeing you go out and make a difference. Can I tell you, last story. Not everybody, most people get hired, but not everybody does. You know what I would encourage you to do? I know the name of the person, I'm not going to mention it. graduated from here a few years back, didn't get a job. He went to the Southern Asia Pacific Division as a volunteer. He learnt how to plant churches, share his faith, work cross-culturally. He has come back after 5 years, and there are more than 3 conferences who want. James White used to say, "I will not employ a young pastor until he's planted a church." So if it doesn't work out as how you want it, just think about there's big needs everywhere else. And I, right at the beginning, there are there are hundreds of young people and young professionals all over Asia and Middle East who are out there, some as paid workers and others as students, others as volunteers, who are raising up new believers in completely different people groups that we have never ever touched. And we need that to explode. And you know the ones who are most likely to do it are the younger ones. That's why I'm sharing the stories, and I'm a bit tired and I'm a bit slow. But I pray that the Spirit has given you an idea that is really the heart of the church. I saw it at this General Conference Annual Council, and I'm seeing it as I now am just starting to get out and visit around. Arika, I think we might have done our time, but people may have 1 or 2 questions. I am happy to answer. Or they might say, "Oh, I've heard enough of that fella. He needs to go and have a sleep." And you would be right.
Sure. Let's put our hands together for our first presenter. And what a wonderful, inspiring start to our weekend together, exploring the topic, of course, of church planting. Listen, you've been sitting for a while. Why don't you just stand as we have this part of the conversation? That is probably good for the circulation as well. We specifically, Wayne asked Glenn to tell stories, and I've enjoyed the stories this evening. Any observations, comments that you want to ask our speaker? Thank you. Trent?
Glenn, if we're getting placed into a church, how can we church plant but also lead a church at the same time if we're new into the space as an intern?
That is a very, very good question. And that depends on your conference president, and it also depends on who your supervisor is. And some supervisors and some conference presidents would be very open to it. I can tell you that when I was a conference president, I was very open to it. And if the supervisors weren't, I would tell them they had to be. In your first couple of years of ministry, learn all you can. I did not plant churches until after internship. But in my internship, I can say that I seeded with a group of elders on the Gold Coast to start a new church in Nerang. We started to do ministry there. 4 years after I left, they had a new group. This year, I opened their new building. And that was just a joy. Now, that's after 30 years they got their first building. That's how difficult it is in some city areas to... And that was with a grant of $1 million from the division, because we have a particular fund that we can use that has been... it can only be used for that purpose. And so we do that to help churches. So even as an intern, I had a heart for church planting way back then. I didn't do it, but we started to, and soon after it happened. So yeah, learn what you can, and do what you can.
Shay, do we have some questions from the online attendees?
Yes. If your local church is against it, but is also dead and driving seekers away, what's your advice? This is from Angela.
Yeah, look, again, another really good question. My advice would be to talk to your pastor and your president and see what can happen. And it is true. You know, it's difficult to get people into a dead church. A new group can be really vibrant. But let me tell you, you'll never work harder than when you're starting a new church. You'll never be more on your knees and things not working right when you're doing something that is new. Because if you've got structure, even if it's dead, you've got structure and you've got a sense of, and you could revive it. But we'll be talking this later this year to all our administrators, and we're going to have Papua New Guineans, so this is administrators from all of the missions and conferences from all of our unions together, and we'll be talking about, and with the Papua New Guineans, we'll be presenting on having hand churches and having this focus of multiplication, because our job... Dead churches, unless they revive, will never grow. And you can't expect new people to come. So it's easier to start something new than to raise the dead.
We have time for one more question. Any questions or comments? All right, listen, let's be seated. We had thought of taking a break at this point, but also very mindful of our time and the fact that we had a little late start. So I think we will have time at the end, around 8, to fellowship, to network, but we will move ahead now with our next presentation. And so I'm going to invite Maddy and Maryellen to come up to the stage. Again, let me remind you, you have space in your booklets. You also have a pen. They are there for you to use when something is said that speaks to your heart. I think it's nice to jot them down while it's fresh in your mind tonight. We need another stool. I think there's one right there. Fantastic. Yeah, good. Listen, we have a little bit of your bio in our booklet, which our attendees can have a look at it. But perhaps it's a short liner, just to put us into your context before you move into your research. Maryellen, specifically, what role you're playing in terms of the mission of the church right now?
So I am actually sort of related. I'm a freelancer, I'm a writer and illustrator, and I work for all different levels of the Adventist church, have done in the past, do now. And specifically, the reason I'm here tonight is because I helped write the report that we're going to sort of present on. Did some of the, not research, Maddy did all the research, but helped kind of organize it in a way that people can understand, hopefully. So, yeah.
Welcome. Thank you for making yourself available to be part of tonight's program. Maddy, very quickly, your role in terms of helping the mission of the church.
Yeah, so I work at the division office as part of the MSD team. So my role is to manage the new innovation fund that just got launched in July this year. My background is in business. I grew up in a church plant, and I've been on the board of a couple. So yeah, really passionate about this topic, and yeah.
I made the comment when we introduced the Mission Symposium that part of a symposium is providing a forum, a space to share new research, new discovery, if you may. You worked on the research, something that's really fresh, and for the next 20, 30 minutes, you're going to share with us some insights into that research. Am I correct?
That's right.
All right, let me give you a microphone as well, Maryellen.
Thanks, Erika. All right, how's everyone doing? We're surviving? It's good to see you all, and it's good that I've gotten to sort of know a lot of people in the room over the last couple of years, so yeah, thanks for being here. Yeah, look, tonight we're just gonna look at a project that we did. I probably wouldn't call it full-on research. It's a conversation. So we interviewed 15 leaders in our top 6 cities, largest 6 cities, our 6 metropolitan cities in the division. We've got to click it, Craig. Sweet. These are all leaders in our churches. Most of them have planted their own churches. 11 of them are pastors. 4 of them are lay members. 13 of the 15 were selected for this project by the conference presidents. The 14th was selected by one of the pastors that was selected, and the 15th was our very own Shaylee. We needed an extra female and an extra person from Sydney, so we pulled Shaylee in for that one. So we've got 15 urban ministry leaders that have taken part in this conversation. And really what we wanted to do is we wanted to find out what are the opportunities and the challenges of urban ministry.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
15 may not sound like a lot when it comes to quote-unquote research, but it was so interesting analysing their responses, how consistent they were over the board, across the board. So we sort of theorised if we had had 30, it probably would have kind of had the same result, we think. But, this is the start of a conversation, so...
Yeah, and the consistency of the themes that came through the conversation gives me a lot of confidence that this is it will resonate with you tonight, hopefully. So yeah, look, I think
No, just...
when we look at what is the need for looking at urban ministry, this is something that's sort of established or recognised globally throughout the Christian community. We've got in terms of population rate, population growth, and in terms of the growth of Christianity within urban centres, we're struggling to keep up across the board globally. We're at about 1.5% growth within Christian communities, and the population rate's at about 2%. It varies from place to place, but that's sort of where it sits. Within Australia, across the board, not just in the cities, across the board, our church growth resembles kind of the same numbers, around about 1.5%. For church growth in Australia, and about 2% population growth. New Zealand looks a little bit better. We're looking at just under 2% population growth, and some of the years over the past decade, we've seen even 3-4% growth in the church over there. But it's a really valuable conversation to have, and a lot of people are looking at this space going, how do we do ministry in urban centres? So hopefully some of the insights tonight you'll find valuable.
A common comment that many respondents made was, if Jesus was to return, or if he'd come the first time in 2022, came to Earth, where would he go? And, obviously he'd go to the cities. That's where the people are. And so I guess that just adds to the importance of this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And these are the people that were involved in the conversation. This was a fun project. It was really insightful.
Yeah, so the first sort of thing we wanted to gauge...
Most of those people have graduated from Avondale, and not that long ago. There's only about 2 or 3 that are old blokes like me.
Yep, a lot of young leaders on that list, passionate.
Yeah,
and
so when I'm, it might take a year or 2 out of internship, but if you let your presidents know that you're passionate about it, they're up there.
Yeah, so this conversation, we're going to be putting out a report in hopefully about 4 to 6 weeks, so keep your eye out for it. Tonight is just a teaser. We haven't actually launched the report for it, but keep your eye out for it and you'll get to see the full thing. Yeah.
So before we dive into the meaty bits of this conversation, the first thing we wanted to sort of analyse was what the environments actually look like that these 15 people, but also what urban environments are like in general, what doing ministry is like. And there were three very strong themes that came through. The first was that cities are a mixed bag of cultures and classes. So there's a really wide disparity between the richest and the poorest. One respondent also said that, in Sydney, for example, if you go from one suburb to the next, it kind of feels like you're going from country to country. There's real dense cultural populations that inhabit cities. So they saw that mostly as an opportunity, like a good thing, but also it does present some challenges. The second was that cities are highly secular environments. This goes without saying. Australia and New Zealand especially, very secular countries. And a lot of respondents said that, a lot of people just don't see the relevance, they don't see the need for God anymore. We've got everything here, we're self-sufficient. And that self-sufficiency sort of plays into the third point, the third characteristic, which is that urban environments are just busy places. People are busy. A lot said that, the church these days isn't just having to compete with, people being busy with work, trying to make ends meet, study, all that kind of stuff. But now there's so much entertainment in cities, and people really, they really protect that free time that they have. So to say, hey, come to church at 11 a.m. on a Saturday is sort of a challenging concept for a lot of people. So those were the three characteristics of cities that we're dealing with.
Yeah. And you might ask why only cities in Australia and New Zealand. We really, this was a project in partnership with Wayne, Mission to the Cities. We really wanted to focus on our metropolitan cities. Otherwise the project would get quite large. Look, we also started off looking at the urban perceptions of Christianity. And there's been a fair bit of research out recently on this topic. The McCrindle's Faith in Australia report. The South Pacific Division has also commissioned an external perception study of the Adventist Church recently. So it was really good to see that the comments from these leaders really resonated with a lot of that quantitative data that's been gathered over the last 5 or so years. And it really, you can break it down into these three categories. Firstly is this element of dissonance where Christianity is viewed as not upholding its own, its own mandate and its own standards. So they look at how Jesus is presented compared to how Christianity behaves. So this element came through quite strongly. The second one is that element of ignorance. People just don't know. And a lot of the respondents saw this as an opportunity where people might be curious about it. If you don't know about something, then you've got that opportunity to lean in. And then the last one is that element of relevance where people are finding it hard to, identify how does Christianity relate to my life today? What does it do for me today? So these are the three main sort of dominant perceptions of Christianity from people within urban cities. Yeah.
I think to add to that just briefly, a lot of people mentioned the role of the media plays in shaping those perceptions, and how not for the first time in history, but increasingly the baseline perception from secular urbanites is negative toward Christianity, toward the church. Dissonance, ignorance, relevance. It used to be that there was baseline positive. The church was more the centre of society, but we're moving more and more away from that. So it takes a lot of effort to sort of get onto neutral ground, let alone positive ground. Anyway.
Yeah, once again, this is sort of supported by what we've seen in research and what Christians have been writing about for the last decade across the board.
So what we did with the research was we kind of split it into two categories. The first was urban perceptions toward Christianity as a whole. And then the other question we sort of asked was, what are perceptions toward Adventism? Now, it was really interesting because respondents, when they were talking about Christianity, what they said was fairly consistent. Fit nicely into those three categories. It was easy to analyse. When it came to our perceptions of how people perceive Adventists, which is a bit of a mind warp, but anyway, it was very difficult to sort of put them into categories. It was very varied across the board. So, for example, here we have three main characteristics: ignorance, the fact that we're quirky or unique or peculiar people, and also the fact that we're recognised by our institutions. But even within those categories, when it came to ignorance, for example, Some respondents said, oh, people have never heard of Adventists. They have no idea who we are. Whereas other people said, oh, well, they often confuse us with, like, the J-Dubs and the Mormons. They think we're in that group. Whereas others said, oh, no, they just think we're like every other denomination. So you can see there's kind of internal, not conflict, but sort of, different opinions when it comes to these categories. The second was that we're quirky, we're peculiar, we have some unique behaviours. People thought that we were identified by keeping Sabbath, not drinking alcohol, eating vegetarian, going to big camp, all those kind of behaviours. And then finally, institutions. So a lot of people thought that the major touch points for secular urbanites were our schools, our hospitals, our universities, and then ADRA and things like that.
Yeah, and for the last point, most people said if they did have contact with our schools, our institutions, our service initiatives, their perception was generally positive towards the Adventist Church. That's important to note.
Yeah. It's also very interesting. I was sort of analysing this after having sort of written everything up, and it was clear that, there's internal inconsistencies with how we kind of perceive ourselves, how we think others perceive us. And this is interesting because I wonder if it affects external perceptions, right? Because the SDA perception study that Maddy mentioned, the highest proportion of people, I think it was 1,500 people surveyed in that one or something?
In Australia, 2,500 across Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah. The largest proportion of people, so 28% in Australia and 28% in New Zealand, said they couldn't name a single core characteristic of the Adventist Church. They didn't know anything. So it's just interesting. Compare that.
Yeah, it gives you a level of that ignorance factor, sort of getting an idea of where that sits. Yeah. Yeah, look, and really, we really wanted to look at both sides, the opportunities and the challenges, and we wanted this to inform sort of an approach to move forward. So, we asked a few questions. There were 20 questions in the whole study, and then there were really only 6 main questions that we asked. So the questions on this one, we asked things like, what open opportunities do you see for reaching secular urbanites? What church-run initiatives are effective at reaching urban populations? What beliefs or practices does the Adventist Church have that could be attractive? And really, we're looking at sort of 2 elements there that were identified as opportunities within cities, as in relation to cities. We also have opportunities and strengths within our churches, as in built in within what we do. So opportunities and strengths identified just because of how cities run, how cities function is firstly that element. You've got so many needs, right? You've got so many different population groups, so many different community groups. So those needs are plentiful within an urban environment. And then there's also a lot of existing groups and initiatives and things that you can plug into and connect into in urban settings. So those 2 main things we're seen as just really strong open needs that any city will have available to you.
One of the things I really liked that kind of came out was, people mentioned getting involved in the RFS. They mentioned, food pantries, all kinds of opportunities in cities. But it was sort of this sense that we need to start caring about what other people care about. Because often we think, they have to start caring about what we care about, the gospel, Jesus. That's not on their radar. We need to start caring about what they care about, and that's kind of a fast track to relevancy. It's fast track to connection. So that was just something interesting, I thought.
Yeah, connecting into the local sports club, local Lions club,
Yeah, so when it came to opportunities and strengths of Adventist churches specifically, again, there were 2 main sort of tenets that came out. The first was, again, there are lots of existing opportunities. We have so many programs, so many initiatives. You can see them all in the red bubble on the right-hand side. The 2 that sort of stood out the most were mothers groups and health programs. So if you're looking for practical ideas, mothers groups and health programs tend to have the most traction, tend to get the most amount of people. This is, of course, with 15 people that we surveyed, so take it with a grain of salt. And then the second is that our beliefs can be attractive. The Sabbath, there's all kinds, obviously salvation, eternal life, all these things are wonderful. But then the question comes up, and this is interesting because every opportunity presents a challenge, every challenge kind of presents an opportunity, they're 2 sides of the same coin. So the question is, yes, we have lots of existing opportunities. Are we catering these to secular urbanites? Are we actually using these effectively? And again, are we communicating our beliefs in an effective way? Are we making them understandable and relevant? So, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the respondents mentioned some of the great initiatives which we already have, which some of them are listed up there, like Pathfinders, and also the fact that we already have existing faith communities in those locations. We often have facilities in those locations. We have things running already in those locations. So these are great opportunities, compared to some of the locations which Glenn mentioned earlier, where you don't have any of that, and you're really starting from scratch. Yeah. Cool. Challenges and weaknesses. So we asked a few questions on this front. What's the greatest challenge you face when talking to someone about Jesus or Christianity? What are some objections to Christianity you have encountered? What Adventist belief or practices hold back our ability to reach cities? And once again, we sort of were able to categorise this into two responses. The first one is that lifestyle change that is required when you adopt new beliefs and new set of values. So that was always that's something that consistently came through. It's difficult for someone to adopt something and then see that change sort of happen within your daily routine and your daily behaviours and practices. And then the second one is this element of skepticism, low biblical literacy or ignorance, if you want to call it, towards Christianity, and those negative perceptions which we sort of mentioned earlier. And look, that came through quite strongly, particularly around how do we relate to culture? How do we relate to people that don't believe like us? And what does that look like? They often view our views in the Bible and as quite just ridiculous in some sense, nonsensical. They can't see the reason and the logic and within it. So that's a big challenge to overcome. This element of how do we relate with the LGBT community? This came up in most of the interviews, and it is probably, if you're going to look at a particular hot topic, across the board was identified as one of the highest priority things that we need to wrap our heads around. How do we relate with LGBT communities?
Yeah, and that response was also came out in the Faith and Belief in Australia and New Zealand studies. They were, I think, 2017, 2018. At that point in time, I'm sure it's possibly even more now, that was the biggest blocker for secular urbanites engaging in Christianity, full stop. 47% of Australians and 47% of New Zealanders said that was the biggest thing for them, so interesting. So now we move on to really the meatiest part of this whole thing. I think we could probably present on this alone for half an hour. We would try not to spend that long on it.
And mostly because this is the part that we have control over, right?
Exactly.
Like, we can't change the city, but we can change the things within our churches. So, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges respondents identified was, we mentioned low biblical literacy before in society. We need to address that with high gospel literacy. We need to know how to communicate Jesus in relevant ways to people that have no frame of reference. The problem is we don't have that. We've got low gospel literacy. A lot of people said that people have Adventists have low self-awareness, they have low empathy when it comes to relating to these kind of situations, people. And that as a result, we often ask the wrong questions. We assume the questions that people are asking rather than actually talking to someone and asking them. The question is,
what happens when you die? Or,
right.
And we assume that people are asking these questions, but often it's not the question that they're asking.
Exactly, yeah. The question is, why do we make these assumptions? Why do we have low gospel fluency? And that brings us to the second point, which is that we have an insular us versus them kind of a mindset. And I think this was probably the most commonly said thing, the biggest problem. So in those three little pink bubbles there, we've got, first of all, the perceived need to separate from the world. Now, we are blessed as Adventists to have an end-time message. We are blessed to have prophecy and all of these amazing things. But it has a tendency to make us kind of, want to move away from the cities, for lack of better words. So we look at the moral decline happening around us and we think, how can I flee from here? But so many respondents said, that's the opportunity. Like, we need to be staying. We need to be actually engaging in conversations now because people are starting to ask questions.
Yeah, so this came through a fair few of the interviews where there's this confusion on how do we relate with culture. Do we lean in and be incarnational and dive in and get involved in community projects and all that kind of stuff? Or, there's the wording from a few of them where we do outreach at a distance or evangelism at a distance. We can, the methods that we use don't really get in there developing friendships. And so, I think that's what that's sort of referring to. And even the first point sort of leans in on that a little bit where, I guess, within our communities, we have a certain language and a certain, vocabulary that we use when we talk about spiritual things, right? So what's required and what came through was the ability for us to be able to, and for our members in our churches to be able to articulate the gospel in language that urban dwellers are currently understanding and using, and simplifying the gospel right down, with that low biblical literacy. People don't care about some of the in-depth doctrinal things that in the Bible. They don't even know who Jesus is. Some of the research that's come out recently, we're looking at half the population don't have a clear understanding of who Jesus is. I think
it was 3% of Australians, I think maybe 2% of New Zealanders. It was definitely 3% of either New Zealanders or Australians have never heard of Jesus before, and that was faith and belief in Australia. So that's
incredible.
That's confronting, Never heard of Jesus? What? Anyway, the second thing that we do, we love programs. Adventists love programs, and that's great for Adventists. But when it comes to reaching secular urbanites, these programs can be very self-serving. They make us comfortable. They're things that we enjoy, we attend, but there's no sort of, secular urbanites aren't even on our radar. We speak language they don't understand. It was mentioned that often we spend so much energy on these programs. We put our heart and soul into them, only to find that it's only serving our congregation, and then we don't have the energy to then go out and do outreach. So that was interesting to me. The third point here is that there's often a short-term vision for outreach in churches. Now, this is not entirely kind of the church's fault. Often pastors get moved around, and that's just how it is. But it kind of reflects this pastor-centric, view that we have within our churches, where the pastor's the one that has to be setting those KPIs, those goals, that approach that we're going to take. But that's not sustainable, that's not long-term. We need to be planning 10 years in advance, not 2 or 3 years in advance, right? And then there was also this point of us as church members being impatient with people's spiritual journeys. We don't walk with them, we get frustrated when they don't get things quickly enough, or they don't meet behavioural standards quickly enough, and we kind of just don't do the journey with them, so.
Yeah, and a lot of this came through the practical experience. A lot of these guys, Gene Haar and Roy in Melbourne, their journey to date is about 10 years planting in Melbourne City. Lachlan Campbell, north of Brisbane, he actually took a job as a teacher so that he could make sure that he remains in that community long term. So these have had practical implications on their ministry journey. Yeah.
The final point here is that Adventist churches often, not all the time, but often will cling to tradition, the way something's always been done, at the expense of innovation. I guess this kind of goes without saying a lot of the time, but this is not only when it comes to our programs and the things that we practically do, but even when even definitions of things. How do we define evangelism? For the longest time, it's been public evangelism. It's been converting people with the truth. But a lot of the respondents said that that's not really working anymore. We need to redefine and expand, not to do away with that stuff that has its place, but to expand what evangelism actually means. And the final point here, we cling to tradition, and that means that there's a lack of sort of mentorship. We don't pass the keys on to the younger generation. This one hits home for me. I know I've had passion in the past and taken something to a board meeting or a business meeting, and it's been kind of knocked back, and you're just like, you kind of start giving up after a while, and I think that's happening across the board.
There was a lot of reference to young people within churches that have a lot of passion, have a lot of drive, have a lot of initiative, and they're not finding the support that that they need within those church communities to run with some of that. And look, that's hard. I mean, I heard somewhere that the definition of an institution is to reduce risk and stay afloat and maintain, and so it's hard to ask for change, because change is disruptive, but it is also invigorating, and it also brings in a freshness and so that came up a lot with how do we engage with our own youth, and passing on the baton, mentoring them, coaching them into positions of leadership, that sort of thing. Yeah, recommendations. So we really wanted, we asked a few questions for this one. What mindset or approach do our churches need to adopt in order to connect? What approach is needed in faith sharing? What would a church look like where your secular friends would feel welcome? So what we really wanted to do is look at those opportunities, look at those challenges, and have those two things inform what approach would be most useful to move forward. And we did not expect it to come out this cleanly.
No, we did not.
And to have this beautiful 4-step model. It just happened that way, but it really just resonated through. And for each of the things that we've presented tonight, we've got like multiple comments across the board from the respondents. It's not, so it really just fell this way.
Yeah, so this is not necessarily a step-by-step pathway, but it can work as one. Anyway, take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, the first thing that really came out in what people were recommending and saying was that we need to start empathizing. I guess to put it a little bit bluntly, no, maybe I shouldn't say it. Sometimes Adventists can be peculiar, and that's something that we take pride in, but maybe it shouldn't be, because often we don't know how to relate to people, right? So this is really talking about adopting Christ's view of people. That came up again and again. So seeing them as sons and daughters of God, getting rid of this hierarchical, prejudicial at times sort of view that we have of us versus them. And some people even said, Jesus, he sacrificed his comfort and he sacrificed his reputation to reach people. Are we doing that? Just something to ponder. And so with empathizing is really this, like the way we do that is we listen, right? And so listening brings us to our next step here, I guess, which is connect. We need to start connecting with people. I was very close to calling this, create safe spaces or something, because they're like one and the same, go hand in hand. Creating safe places in which to connect with people. So these places need to be accessible, inclusive, non-judgmental, without jargon or expectations for behaviour. A lot of people mentioned it's like so important to keep it simple. It really is. You don't have to, go to the ends of the earth to like reach these people. You just have to have something simple for them. I think every single person, or at least 90% of people, mentioned the importance of food. Who doesn't love food? Connecting over a meal, that was a really big thing. And then also actually carving out time. Like we mentioned, cities are busy places. Adventists are not exempt from that, right? We're all busy. And so, just kind of taking a leaf out of Jesus's book and not having to be at a business meeting at 2 p.m., not having to rush off anywhere, just kind of going with the flow was something that really came out, which is a challenge. It certainly is a challenge for me, but yeah.
And those safe places that the respondents were mentioning, okay, we've got to create these safe places where people come together and experience community. They often refer to, like people are leaving their comfort zone. So make it relatable. Make it something that they don't have to leave, like one of our respondents said, every corner of their comfort zone in order to come into church. So really trying to meet culture halfway and create spaces where they could step in and feel like, all right, this is, and people mention things like, just barbecues in the park. Well, some of our respondents do church in the park. So,
who needs a building? The next point here is service. So it was actually like respondents clearly said, like explicitly said, there's no silver bullet here. There's no step-by-step approach when it comes to service. You need to develop a unique approach with your church, with your community, to fulfill their needs. And so serve and connect kind of work in a cycle. You need to connect with people in order to know how to serve them, but when you're serving them, you're connecting with them, so it's kind of it goes around and around. And this reflects with the SDA perception study, actually. It was really interesting. People were asked what should be the main role of churches in 2022. Australians and New Zealanders said helping others, more than like 60% pretty much of us Aussies and Kiwis said helping others, and then connecting with them. Those were the two biggest things. So that's why it's in the diagram. You want to say anything?
It's really interesting because when you go back to that study, they asked the question, would you go to a religious service? And they had a whole bunch of services listed, but there were I remember the Australia statistics, about 80% would say that they would not attend any sort of religious service. But then on the other hand, only 60%, I'll fix that up, 60% of people said that they would not attend any religious service. But on the other hand, 80% of people said that church still has some value in society. So only 20% said there's no value. So that's interesting, where you've got 60% of people were not really interested in walking into a religious service, yet many more of those, 80%, still see value. And these are the two things that they brought up as the top things that we could be providing value for, serving the needs of the community and providing communities, opportunities for people to connect.
Yeah, exactly. So finally, we're nearly done. Thank you for your patience and staying awake. The final point here is to reframe. So as you serve people, your worldview begins to change. You begin to see them through that empathetic lens that we talked about initially. And some people mentioned the importance of training in this area. So not only kind of, redefining what evangelism is and seeing people in a different light, but we've often, as a church, done training, like evangelism training in a particular way with particular methods, door knocking or whatever you want to call it. But even just expanding that, looking at people's unique gifts and talents and asking ourselves, how can we train them better or differently?
And that element of just presenting the gospel in a relevant way. So seeing where are they at, what are the top 3 things, top 5 things, top 10 things that they are concerned about, and how does the gospel speak into that? How does the Bible speak into that? And we know those things, like when you look at Mission Australia did a recent study with ridiculous amount. I think there was 30,000 young people, and they had a list of things that were the top priority for our young people. The top 3 being inclusivity, racism, and mental health. And then there were a whole bunch of other things on the list. But so, how do we reframe the gospel to speak into the issues which are right now relevant within the culture around us? Yeah, so I'm very happy with how neatly this turned out, and it's quite informative, and some really good, I think my clicker stopped working. You want to hit the next one for me? Some really good comments from, here we go, we're back, from each of the respondents on this one. Yeah, look, we also just wanted to ask some questions, and we're nearly done, so hang in there. Is Jesus still attractive? This was really based by that passage in John chapter 3, is coming from a standpoint that Jesus is relevant and attractive to every culture at every time. And we asked what is it that still has that pull, that still draws people to Jesus? And these 2 things came out very clearly, just genuine care and belonging, and peace, rest, and hope. And it was quite interesting to see the contrast between some of the earlier questions and this question, where people would respond that, Jesus is inclusive, yet the church feels so exclusive and judgmental. And so this contrast came through quite strongly, but all the respondents were very confident that there is a massive need and a massive appeal for what the gospel has to offer for today's urban settings.
So finally, we asked respondents to give advice for church planters. So if you are thinking about church planting, definitely keep your eyes out for the report, because it's got a lot of gold nuggets in there. Do you want to go through this? Do we have time? Or do you want to skip
We've
it?
put a few up here, but there's a lot more that they pulled out in the report. This was just a scattering, so yeah.
Yeah, so having a core team that is sold out to Jesus, having that supportive base, that was super, super important. And on that note, keeping people at the center, whether it's like your core team of people, whether it's the people you're ministering to, like not getting too caught up in like, you know, buildings and all the stuff that comes with the church, keeping people at the center. The second was to be patient. Like it's often the case that you want to do everything at once and reach all the people at once, but you got to take it slow. It can be years and years and years. The third was to have regular and clear communication with your local conference, because church plants operate differently to regular churches. You know, we understand how a regular church works. We know the needs. We know what they're about. But when it comes to church plants, often a conference won't know how to support you unless you tell them, right?
So knowing how to present a strong case for why that particular church plant run in that particular way to your leadership team and the conference leadership team is important.
And finally, just to be courageous and be brave. One of the respondents said he thinks of it like Peter. You know, church members are the people in the boat looking at the boat swaying back and forth, but you have to be Peter and you have to step out of the boat and look at Jesus. And so, just to have courage.
And it's tough, like Glenn mentioned earlier. You have you're exposed, you're vulnerable, and you feel the weight of that, and you might walk away with some scars. But so, you know, the respondents definitely, just said you've got to be courageous, but jump out and do it, because it's the best thing, or the most exhilarating thing, that journey that you can undertake as a minister. Yeah, look, I think, you know, for me, looking at this topic, and this is a topic that's challenged me, for a long time. My family, we've always lived in smaller cities, but right in the heart of cities, we've been involved in business communities, and putting your finger on what are the handbrakes and what are the opportunities? Where do we go from here? You know, understanding the landscape. And for me, this project really changed my view and helped me to just better understand exactly the landscape. And it gives me hope, because I can see that there are massive opportunities within urban ministry. It takes a lot of reframing, fresh thinking, letting go of old methods and old ways of doing things, finding new and fresh ways to present Jesus and to present the gospel. But there are opportunities there, and I definitely think that there are massive needs there, you know, particularly within, you know, like some of the respondents, they mentioned some specific areas, like with families and mothers groups and all that kind of stuff, you know, tailored to specific, you know, immigrants moving in, settling in within cities. That's a massive need, you know, new people moving into cities. But really across the board, the respondents were not sold out for any particular method, and they encouraged, you need to do the hard work and develop a purpose and a strategy for your particular setting, and find that convergence point where you can connect with culture, meet the local needs.
Yeah, I think for me, something that really stood out was, you know, it's easy to get frustrated when it comes to church growth, church planting, when things aren't going the way you want them to and you're not reaching the people you want to. But just having put language to some of those feelings that I've experienced, I'm sure you've experienced them too, was so clarifying. And it puts in place, like, you know, now I can actually do something about it, because I actually know what the problem is now. So that's kind of what stood out to me. That, and also the fact that, like, it's easy to get negative and be like, oh, you know, we can't do this because of this and that. But actually, we have such an advantage as a church. You know, we have a core group of people. We have people that are sold out to the gospel. You know, we've got resources in place. We have ministries already in place. It's just a matter of, like, tweaking them slightly to make them more effective for the people you want to reach. So, yeah, it was encouraging, actually, to me.
And hearing the stories of the experience, the journey of, you know, these guys that are actually doing it and doing it well was really encouraging. Yeah. Do we have time for some questions, Arinka?
Sure, absolutely. Hey, let's put our hands together for our presenters. What stands out for you? I mean, there's lots of data, but there's some very good recommendations. I also like that model towards the end. It kind of speaks to that statement, you know, Christ's method alone. It's, you know, gospel-centered, relational. Thank you so much for that.
Every respondent said it needs to be a relational approach.
Yeah, fantastic. Do we have another microphone in the back there? Oh, thank you. Wayne?
I think along with you, it is. Oh, yeah. I think along with everyone here, I really want to commend the two of you for this research. You're not using the word research. The conversation you're having, I think it's very powerful, and I think it's going to be very useful in so many ways for our church going onward. So I know it was a challenge to do it. I'm glad when Maddy came to me in the first place and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Go for it." And
it was a challenge to cut it down. Like we cut it down from 200,000 words to about 14,000 in the report, and even this is like, we feel like we're presenting a very patchy picture. Get the report.
I've seen obviously the report the draft of 40 pages. Okay, so really looking forward to the whole thing. I do have a question. The issue of listening, how did that come out in your conversations? You kind of mentioned it, but in the report it seemed to be a bit stronger than what you said.
Yeah, it was consistent. I mean, we've sort of used different, in this presentation we've sort of used different language around leaning in, but there were so much about just sitting down, having a meal with someone and waiting to understand where they're coming from and their worldview. This was so powerful, so I'm glad you brought it up. Start with listening,
Yeah, one of the quotes we didn't get to read out because we ran out of time was talking about how, like, the ministry happens at the pulpit, but the real ministry happens at lunchtime when you're talking about what happened at the pulpit, kind of thing, with that listening and all that kind of stuff.
We have a question, observation with Rodney, and then we'll come back to Glenn.
Thanks, guys. I really would like to affirm the work that you've done there. It's some fantastic things that you've put together there for us there. And yeah, absolutely, the Jesus method is the only way, is, to meet people where their needs are and to address those needs. The only thing that I would want to suggest, though, is under the advice for church planners, and I think that everything really hinges off prayer. I know it might sound a little bit glib, but I think that prayer is
that came through.
The most core element when it comes to church planning. And we see in Acts 16, the verse that we read before, that it was the Lord who opened Lydia's heart, and that was because of prayer. It's not what we do the action, but it's God who provides the harvest, and so I think that's very key.
Yeah, absolutely.
That came out through two points strongly. Firstly was having a team that is sold out for Jesus, and that there was a lot of mentions to prayer in that, and it also came out through when engaging and faith sharing, that you're listening and you're trying to sort of understand where they're coming from, but within that interaction, a lot of that takes divine inspiration, takes the Holy Spirit's leading. So there was a fair few mentions to that as well.
Pastor Glenn, you have a comment?
These guys are in trouble. It's too revolutionary. No, I will want you to present this in some other forums.
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll happily have you back. But the other thing that when I looked at the 15 people that they come from just about every conference in this country, which shows you that the leadership of the church is open to new creative ways of doing ministry. And so if you get an opportunity, learn the basics of ministry, and if this is your passion, start working on it and just see where it goes. But make sure you develop a good reputation, and that means that you do do what you're told sometimes. And why did Wayne react that way?
This is church planting advice from the other way around.
It is.
Thanks, Glenn.
Any other comments or observations? Again, the report is very practical, and you guys have put it together in such a way that it's easy to understand, but also to follow some of the recommendations and suggestions. So that's very helpful for church planters and church leaders. So thank you for that. I'm looking across. Any other comments or suggestions? Wayne? Erin?
Cheers. Just a question, not necessarily to you guys, although that was brilliant. I loved just the graphics that really highlighted the main points in that as well. Thank you. Maybe question to the floor. 47% of people found LGBTIQ was an obstruction to coming into the Adventist faith. That's astonishing. Like, we're obviously not hitting the mark for nearly half of the population. Like, how do we, I don't know, I've never attended a church that really went out there to fight for that. Like, it's a very foreign concept. Do we have any ministries currently in place that are working successfully?
It's a complete deal breaker because people see that and they're like, well, if you're excluding that community, then what other communities are you excluding? So, yeah, that is, I guess, where the light is currently shining, but it provides a sweeping picture of Christianity's inclusiveness. Yes.
If we add to that, this 46% of people, the church is considered unethical and immoral.
Yep. A lot of reference to that.
They're bringing it to the areas of morality and ethics and seeing the church as unethical and immoral. The question, one part of the question is, Aaron, I think is, what do we have to do to be even invited to the table with our LGBTQ brothers and sisters for them to want to have a dialogue with us, because they see us as the enemy, because that's often how we're betrayed it. So.
Yeah, and there was a few mentions to needing to earn back our voice in society through things like meeting needs and service, and yeah.
And knowing how to communicate the gospel.
Yeah, just on that point, I think to this day, I've only heard of maybe one person that was in the community. So I did a Rise a number of years ago, and we had what was her name again? Verna? Was it Verna? And she was part of the LGBTQ plus community for many years, I think for maybe 20. And her experiences in it were really eye-opening, to hear her testimony and her coming out of it and everything and back to the church. But I guess I don't really have anything like new to say, but I think it was refreshing listening to her in the sense of, instead of waiting, I guess, for people to come to you, she was suggesting the church get involved with the community, that community in particular. And some of her, I guess, proposals and methods, I remember in the class were kind of like split down the middle. Some people were like, oh, this is too crazy, or like, we shouldn't be supporting open sin like that. But others were like, we should probably be a little bit more forthright and thinking. And, she had suggestions of like setting up booths at like gay pride marches or whatever it is, offering some sort of service. I can't remember exactly what she was suggesting. But I guess with communities like that, with any community, you're probably going to have to put yourself out there in the midst of where it is. And that's like super uncomfortable. But I think to this day, I haven't really heard any other way to go about it. And she seemed to have had a lot of success doing that. So I don't know, maybe if we know of more people that have probably come from that side of things, and they could probably have a lot to teach us in terms of ministering and like different perspectives. But I found that really helpful as someone who's like never been involved with that community, although I might have friends in it. I'm so detached from that world. I really, really am. It was really helpful having someone who'd come out of that give insight and even proposed different ways to minister. They were very hands-on, just as like donating food at a food bank was very hands-on. Sorry, I don't know, I'm taking up time. But anyway, I just thought I'd say that.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And some of the participants mentioned that sometimes that takes prioritising that over your own reputation, because doing that, it's not an easy thing, but you need to want to reach people more than you want to care about what other people think of what you're doing.
And it's interesting that Pastor Glenn has asked our ministry team to look at the challenges our church and society is going to be looking at in the next 10, 20 years. And we've just started doing that, and I've identified this issue as probably number one. And so now the question is, okay, how do we relate? How do we get invited to the table for that? But to let you know that at the division level, we're seriously looking at these challenges in the future. There's a question from the live stream, just a sec.
Sure. Thank you.
Did you guys find much difference between, I'm guessing, results between younger and older generations?
No.
Younger and older generations?
Were there any differences between the younger and older generations in your research?
In terms of the respondents, the age of the people we interviewed, in terms of that, no difference whatsoever. In terms of general research from the population, you'd have to refer to things like the perception study that's just been conducted, or Faith in Australia. They've got all that breakdown, but that wasn't what we sort of were looking for with this.
I mean, the caveat to that is that obviously we're interviewing a specific group of people. You know, they're all in the same area. They all have very similar views toward how to do church. So I guess that's probably why there wasn't.
Yeah, but pretty much all of these guys are running churches which are multi-generational, cross-generational. They're not, starting a particular youth church or something. So.
Again, these kinds of studies force us as a church, as a people, to recognize the reality of the landscape and then to think creatively so that we can do church and ministry differently. So thank you again for sharing this report with us, and we'll be looking to the full report coming out at some point in time. We have done very well as a group tonight. It's a Friday evening. We appreciate the fact that you made a commitment to journey with us, not only tonight, but tomorrow as we continue to explore opportunities in terms of planting churches and being part of the kingdom of God that brings change to a community. Let me remind you very quickly of what happens in the morning, and then I'm going to ask you to stand for the next few minutes before we dismiss from here. Breakfast is offered at 8 in the morning at the cafeteria. And then from the cafeteria, we want to start on time at 9 here. You can look at the program, and you can see that we have a good lineup of speakers, and we will have our chaplain, Priscilla, as well, who will host us in the morning. So breakfast is 8, and then we'll start at 9. One of the things that I picked up, I think it was a comment from Rodney, is the value of prayer in church planting and mission. And here's what I want us to do before we dismiss. I'm going to ask the head of the seminary, Wendy, to come up, and she will close us in a word of prayer. But I want to give an opportunity to your tables, even those of you that are tuning in from home. I want you to pray together. Think, reflect on some of the things that we've heard and shared tonight, and pray that God will give us the eyes to see those needs, and also the heart for people for the kingdom of God. So we will do that for about a couple of minutes, and then at the end, we will have Wendy bringing our prayer time together to a close, and that will be for us for tonight until the morning. So if you want to just stand up around your table, near your table, pray together. Hence, you may join us with Maryellen and Maddy and Glenn over here. Again, spend a few minutes praying together, and then Wendy will close this exercise for us.
We just invite you to bow your heads as we do a final closing prayer. Father, we come before you this evening, your servants, your children. We thank you for the opportunity that we have to be part of your mission. Tonight we have been challenged by the enormity of the problem, but inspired by the way you are working. And Father, as we come here this evening, we ask that you would open our hearts, open our minds, open our eyes to see where you are working so that we can join you in this journey. Father, we have seen the many needs in the cities. Help us to listen, to hear, to present you in relevant ways. And Father, we ask right now that you would challenge us individually about what we do next. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you again, everybody. Special thank you to Craig, managing our streaming and recording, and to Shay down the back, and to Kerry Lee being our special guest from the university. But rest well until tomorrow morning. Good night.